Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Joe on Joe. It is me, your host, Joe Slepsky, and we're back this week. Now, I took a sick day off last week, and I'm still feeling a little under the weather. I don't say that for sympathy, but I do say that for time. I don't have a lot of breath this week. I got a little bit of a sinus thing going on, and it's now in my chest, so this may be a little shorter than normal, but that's okay, because this week we are not doing a traditional illustrated. We're not doing any of the episodes. What we're doing this week is I wanted to take some time out to celebrate an artist, a creator who meant a lot to me when it comes to G.I. Joe specifically, Mark Bright. He passed away earlier this week. A lot of you know him from his work. He did the Snake Eyes trilogy, and he was the first man to illustrate Snake Eyes' busted up face. You guys remember that close up? I still say it wasn't busted up enough though. I really wanted like Toxic Avenger level, but still, Mark was absolutely amazing, and he meant a whole lot to me, and not just with G.I. Joe. So I wanted to take some time today and talk about him and talk about his work. He's one of those creators that contributed a fair chunk to the G.I. Joe mythos, and we're in the middle of talking about it, so let's spend some time talking about him. If you guys love Mark Bright, please reach out to me on social media. Say hello on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Joe on Joe Pod. Send me an email, joeonjoepod@gmail.com. Let me know how much you love Mark Bright, man. And as always, please give some support and love to our wonderful sponsors, the Movies in a Meal podcast. They're here every week, keeping the lights on for you, for me, for everybody. They love G.I. Joe. They love. I saw some hot Godzilla Kong talk this week. So please help support them, help support this show, and give them a listen. Movies in a Meal podcast, just an absolute great people to have in your corner. So we're here to celebrate Mark Bright, of course. We're going to get into a little bit of his wiki. We're going to talk about, I never met him personally, so I never had the pleasure, and I don't know much about him. So I'm learning a lot of this today as I did some research on him. But what I do love is that when I look at his bio, it is stocked with books that I've absolutely read. I think I've read like 80% of his work, and that makes me so happy. I never really, kept tally of that over the years. But when I go to the fandom pages and I look at all the books he's worked on, I go, oh, have that, read it. So we're going to do some of that. We're going to look over some of the stuff and think about the memories there. And just really celebrate someone who absolutely gave a lot to G.I. Joe. So if you're not familiar with his work, listen up, because we're going to talk about some specifics with G.I. Joe. There'll be some spoilers, I guess. Not everyone has a complete run of the series and stuff. His work did come in the numerically in the late 90s, early 100s of the series. So if you don't have those issues, that might be a gap in your collection. And I know they're hard to get digitally, but hopefully I believe Skybound's going to be doing a compendium. So, well, actually, I know that because listener and friend of the show, Scotty, you reached out to Skybound and asked them about that. I saw that in the letters page. I'm seeing a lot of people on the letters page that we know through the show, and I freaking love it, man. I love it. Everyone's keep writing. I think I need to write a letter to Skybound to celebrate what they're doing there. But we're going to celebrate Mark Bright today. So I hope you come along with me on this ride. I hope you guys have enjoyed his work as well. And, here we go. So Mark Bright, born in 1955. They called him Doc Bright because his initials were Mark D. Bright. So it was like MD, like he's a doctor. I never knew that. I knew they called him Doc Bright, and I would see it in the pages. But I never knew that, I thought the D stood for Doc, but apparently it doesn't. It was just his middle initial was D, so people said he was MD. So that's why they called him Doc Bright. If you look at a lot of his early stuff, even really, there was you would see it credited just to Doc Bright, not even Mark Bright. So it's great. I love it. One of those quirks of comics. Comics are so funny. When you see a movie, everyone's credits and everyone's names and stuff has to be perfect, and everyone you look at a comic book and the credits are all over the place. Not only half the time there's people using fake names because they were ashamed of the work. In Hollywood, you'll see someone use a fake name. What is that? Oh, I forget what the fake producer name is that they use, but there's a specific one that they use. They'll use it because they're ashamed of the work. That certainly has happened in comics, but a lot of times back in the day, they were using pseudonyms because, like, the inking, for example, took like 18 different people, and it was great work, but you couldn't credit 18 people, so they would call themselves, the Krusty Bunkers or whatever. So that's really funny. I love that about comic books. But Mark Bright, Doc Bright, he got a start in House of Mystery from DC, a 3-page story in House of Mystery in 1978. And then it'd be another 5 years until he teamed up with Christopher Priest, who is an absolute underappreciated talent. I'm a massive Chris Priest fan. Back in the day, he was, if I recall, he was the first African-American editor at Marvel Comics. He edited the Spider-Man books, and he ended up writing a bunch of the Spider-Man books. At the time, editors wrote a lot of stuff. That's the way it was. And personal reasons, he changed his name to Christopher Priest, and for a long time, he just went by Priest. He's the reason the Black Panther movie that we saw, that we all love, Black Panther, that whole Wakanda Forever thing, all that stuff. A lot of that is pulled from friend Reggie Hudlin and his work, but Reggie Hudlin's work was absolutely built on the shoulders of Chris Priest's work, which Mark Bright had a little bit of contribution to. He did a few of those issues, but Chris Priest's work on Black Panther with the Marvel Knights stuff really established Wakanda as, this future techno state, giving Black Panther all these gadgets instead of just running around in a black leotard, all that kind of stuff. So Chris Priest, his influence you can't talk about Mark Bright without talking about Chris Priest, is what I'm saying. They teamed up on a lot of books, most famously Quantum and Woody, which is their creator-owned book. They put it out through Valiant. It had a recent revival in 2015, both as a revamp by different creators, but also Chris Priest and Mark Bright came back to do their own miniseries on it, which was great. But their original run on Quantum and Woody, late 90s, was absolutely brilliant. 100% character driven. So good. It's funny, very funny. And comic books are hard to be funny. I think that's a truism. It is hard to write a genuinely funny comic book. There are few and far between. There's punny books and there's gag books and there's, satirical books like, Mad Magazine style comedy. And that's certainly a thing. But to write a comic book in continuity, in character, that fits in those universes and is still funny, that's a very hard thing to do. They both accomplished that with Quantum and Woody. It's its own universe, but it could fit in. It was a standard superhero universe. They really nailed it. Quantum and Woody is absolutely great. Of course, he was the artist on Armor Wars, Iron Man's Armor Wars. If you're not familiar with Armor Wars, Marvel has talked, I think that was going to be Rhodes' next movie, or then it was a TV set. I don't know what they're doing with Armor Wars. Armor Wars is an absolutely fabulous comic book story. It may work as a movie, it may work as a TV show. I don't know. Don't let that be your first exposure to Armor Wars. Get the Iron Man Armor Wars trade, read it online, go to Marvel, Marvel Unlimited, read it. It's about 9 issues, something like that. It was done in the days before, they're really corporatized. Your story arc has to be 12 issues and it has to be this so we can pre-package it. It was just a long story that they told in, Bob Layton wrote it, I believe. Or no, Michelini wrote it. And, it was just a long story and it was like 9 issues. It was a weird number of issues and it was absolutely fabulous. And Mark drew all of it except the epilogue, which of course they brought in Barry Windsor Smith to do the epilogue, which of course that's amazing. And he did the Green Lantern Emerald Dawn miniseries, which has fallen out of both. I think it's fallen out of both continuity and favor, but for a very long time, it was the driving origin for Green Lantern. There was, people didn't like it. They said, it made Hal, gave him a drinking problem, in his early days. That was the hurdle he had to get over, It was the era where they were trying to find the damage in all the DC heroes, right? They were grim, and it was the start. It was post Dark Knight. They were starting to grim and gritty it up. And Emerald Dawn came along to kind of revamp the Iron Man origin. I love it. I think it's fabulous, even though it's continuity wise, I think been kicked off to the curb. That's another. We'll get into that a little bit later. So he did some G.I. Joe stuff in 1990, and he did. It was that really intensive Snake Eyes era, right, where he got his face fixed. It was that 3-parter with those Lee Weeks covers, you know. He had to storm the Cobra Castle and rescue Scarlet. Got his, he got that BDSM uniform, as we discussed when we covered those books. And it was his action figure wise, it was his V3 look, with the trench knives across his chest, and that's all Mark Bright drawn the interiors. I don't know if I actually can't think that he did the covers. I think those were all Lee Weeks covers. But the interiors were all Mark Bright all through that era. It was like 97 through like 106 or something. It was right up to a couple issues before they ended up killing everybody. And those G.I. Joe books were awesome. They were absolutely great. The interiors were absolutely great. And he also worked on the trading cards, which we're going to get into. I'm jumping ahead because I could just, I'm what am I doing? I'm laying seeds for you guys to follow, because we're going to get there. So his first work, back to his first work with Christopher Priest, was the Falcon miniseries. And Mark was African-American, as well as Chris. And so to have the two of them do the first miniseries for the Falcon had to be huge for them. It's funny, that miniseries, the first issue was drawn by Paul Smith. It was meant for either Marvel Fanfare or like Marvel Premiere, one of those like one-off Marvel stories. And they liked it so much, they asked Priest, Owsley at the time, to turn it into a miniseries. And so that he brought in Doc Bright to do it. And it's great. It looks great. But that's, if you ever read that series, it's totally disjointed, like ridiculously disjointed. The first issue is pretty much its own adventure. And then the other 3 issues that follow are just, it's also its own adventure. So it doesn't read very well as a, like a solid miniseries. I think that's why it's not really regarded highly as, a great 4-issue adventure, because it's just disjointed, but it's so competently done. And like, imagine those 3 powerhouses. Paul Smith's a powerhouse. Paul Smith, especially at that time, his stuff is great. Him, Owsley, and Mark Bright working on that book. Of course, the only reason it's not considered legendary is because of like some editorial hijinks of you got to turn one story into 4. So that's it. So he did that. And then chronologically, he then went to Power Man and Iron Fist. He did the final 10 issues of that, which I want to say were being written by Kurt Busiek, Thunderbolts fame. I know he wrote a lot of Power Man and Iron Fist at the time. I think he did the final issues. He then did some solo Avenger stuff. Iron Man came around in 87. He did the actual issues of it. And then he moved over to DC. He also was doing Action Comics Weekly at the time. That was over at DC. That would have been around 87, 88. Post Byrne's Action run, because it was when Byrne was treating Action as a team-up book. And it culminated in Action 600, and then 601 was the start of the Action Comics Weekly. To be honest, I don't recall what story he did in Action Weekly. If you're unfamiliar with that series, they took Action, which was always a Superman book, and they turned it to giving Superman just 2 pages. And I want to say Kurt Swan drew the middle 2 pages for most of them. And so Superman had a 2-page spread right in the middle of the book. And then the other 4 stories in it they were oversized issues, were B-level DC characters. Nightwing, Secret Six and Mockingbird. Green Lantern had a long run, because at the time Green Lantern didn't even have his own series. That's where Green Lantern was floundering at the time. So I'm trying to place what Mark would have drawn, and he did do a run, but I don't think he did Green Lantern. I think that was being done by Joe Staton still. But he might have been Green Lantern, but I do think that was still Joe Staton, who had been doing the Green Lantern core stuff before that book folded. Anyway, that book was great. It was great because doing a weekly book in 1987, 86, 87, 88 had to be really difficult because you didn't have computers, you didn't have technology, you couldn't email files to people. You had to send everything FedEx, and to get that done on a weekly schedule, absolute achievement. Some of the stories are, good, bad, or ugly, but the achievement of actually getting it out and getting it produced, stellar, absolutely huge. So he worked on that. Then he did the Green Lantern stuff. He did Emerald Wars, or Emerald Dawn, sorry. Emerald Wars and Emerald Wars. That's your amalgam mashup. He did Emerald Dawn, and then he came back and did a nice long run round issue. Did he do Mosaic? Did he draw the Mosaic? He might have drew the Mosaic issues. He didn't do the Mosaic series, but it was right around the late teens. Actually, I called it up here. Green Lantern. Yeah, it was. Yeah, he did. He did the Mosaic stuff. So he started on like issue 13 of Green Lantern, and he drew the Mosaic 6-issue miniseries, which basically worked as its own miniseries within the pages of the Green Lantern book. And Mosaic was the first time that they took a chance and gave Jon Stewart his own book, both later as the book called Mosaic, but within Green Lantern just really gave him the book. He had it during Crisis, but Hal was always running around. Mosaic was like just a straight up tryout for a Jon Stewart series. It was they sent him to a planet that was a patchwork planet, very much like the Secret Wars Battle World over at Marvel, and he had to figure out how to get these civilizations to work together. This would have been around the time of Cosmic Odyssey. He was a big star in Cosmic Odyssey with Mike Mignola, Jim Starlin. So they were really pushing Jon Stewart at the time. So Mark Bright came in, really loved Mosaic. It was great. Then that launched his actual own series, which I want to say was drawn by Cully Hammer, I think, memory serves. But they killed Chip. They had him run over by a truck. But then he stayed on Green Lantern. So he did those 6 issues for Jon Stewart, and he came back for Green Lantern 25. He did about another, 10, 15, 20. Wow, he drew it all the way up to 46. Oh, yeah, so he did the, wasn't 46 the Destruction of Coast City? Yeah, so he drew Green Lantern all the way through the Destruction of Coast City with the death of Superman. So he's got a long run on Green Lantern. And then 1990 comes around, and here comes G.I. Joe. And we're talking about, let me call it up here. Yeah, like 1989, 1990, he starts drawing G.I. Joe, and a lot of Snake Eyes stuff. This was the era where we introduced the new October Guard. Cobra Commander came back. Do you remember that? It's that big issue with him standing on the cover with his hands up in the air. I'm back. I believe that cover is... Oh no, it's a Ron Wagner cover. It culminates, of course, in the in Snake Eyes. Oh yeah, that's right. He does the he did the return where Zartan and Billy and our boy Tyrone, Justice for Tyrone. Mark Bright drew that issue in G.I. Joe number 97. So and there it is. Here's the Snake Eyes trilogy. That's right. That's what I keep. I think I keep misnaming it. Yeah, the Snake Eyes trilogy. So that's G.I. Joe 93 through 94. Snake Eyes unmasked. He gets the new face, and it gets damaged again. That trilogy is epic. It's absolutely great, and that's Mark Bright on it. It's just a wonderful, wonderful piece of work. He also contributed, from what I found, about a third of the cards. You guys remember the G.I. Joe Impel trading cards, 1992, 93, I think? For those of you who haven't been able to get a collection of those together, they're great, and they're very affordable. Very affordable. If you're hearing this and you've not gotten yourself a set of the G.I. Joe Impel trading cards, you really should, because they're great. They're drawn really well. It's not just Mark Bright. There's a lot of great artists on it. They're very clean. They look great in a binder. They're nice to flip through. And I was going through it trying to look for, the ones that I could see were drawn by Mark. There's a few that I think were drawn by Mark, but I'm not 100% sure. But then you get to the section right around issue number 61, and it's the official battle gear section, right? So there's different sections of the trading cards. There's the original team section, where they have all the, the OG Joes. There's the rank and file, where it's some of the more, just regular common GI Joes with, there's the what do they call it? Patrols, which are like Python Patrol, things like that. And then you get the battle gear section, and his stuff pops. And I look at that and I go, oh yeah, that's absolutely Mark Bright. He did wetsuit. His wetsuit picture is great. Gung Ho in his dress gear. We've got Payload in space. Deep Six in his V2 look. Lightfoot. Fast Draw. Salvo. Hardball. Outback. Airtight. Charbroil. I believe he did. Yeah, looks like he did Ambush too. So he might have actually just done this entire section. Pathfinder. Hit and Run. Did he do the Desert Scorpion? I would wager he did. I can't. Yeah. Oh yeah, he totally did. Because there's a if you're looking at comic artists that you really love, there's always something about their work that either you like or just stands out that you recognize. Example: Jim Starlin draws an extended midsection. Walter Simonson, when he draws a fist, there's always one or two knuckles that are protruded and pointing forward. That's one of his trademarks. Mark Bright has a trademark squint in the eyes where like the characters, when they furrow their brow, that's a trademark. He also draws people, Drew in a crouch, like ready for action. He did that so well. I think that's one of the things I liked about his stuff is that his characters were never standing around. They were ready to go. And when you look at all these, these are just trading card images. Everyone is crouched in some way. No one's standing there. If you think about what the 90s did for action on a page and how they destroyed it, right? 90s action was either standing straight still staring at the camera, or they've already extended and expended their energy and they're flying at someone, and they're, like that was it. There's no tension. There's no moment before the coil, before the spring. You look at Mark Bright's laying these GI Joe cards out in front of me, and you see the rhythms here. You see that he's got this. Everyone's got a little crouch. Everyone's got a little bend in their knee, right? What does that do? That just makes them on the move, coiled for action. They're about to jump off, and what's more exciting than that? Like, I'd much rather see someone like about to do the jump off, because it's just so much more exciting for a flat page. I get it. If you're animating, if you're drawing, something that's live, or you're filming something live action, yeah, you show the moves and stuff. But comics are different, man. Comics, we've said this a lot on the show. Comics are just a different language. And I'll take that coiled tension. Think about Wolverine in the Sewers by John Byrne. There's a lot to love about that picture, but one of the biggest things about that picture, he's looking up at the camera, he just got dropped through by the Hellfire Club. You guys know the picture. That's just tension. That's just his muscles are ready to spring, like someone's going to die on the next page, right? That's what you get, not necessarily death, it's G.I. Joe, but that's what you get in all these great bright illustrations. Techno Viper, Toxo Viper, Hydro Viper. I believe these are all bright. Range Viper. I think he did the Astro Viper. He definitely did Targat. So yeah, it seems like they just gave him this section and the Night Viper. So I'd be surprised if he didn't do all of these, because they really look like all of them. And then on the back you look and you've got the close up of their faces. And the other thing that I absolutely loved is his mouths. He did a I think the best description would be like a taciturn, like your mouth shut, kind of like going like I'm a little frustrated. He did that really well. His characters, that's one of his hallmarks. Nailed it. He also did a square jaw on a comic book character, like not necessarily the chin. I'm not talking about, I mean, his chins were good, don't get me wrong, but his jawline, like the back, whatever the back of the mandible is, like no one gave a bigger mandible, just a square-headed, jawed face, like that could take a punch. His were absolutely dynamite. That is one of his trademarks. It's how I identified his work when I was, especially when I was a young kid, and there was no internet, there was no this, there was no that. I would just look at that and go, oh, that was drawn by that guy who did Armor Wars. That was drawn by that guy who did Green Lantern. I really like his stuff. Let me go check more of his stuff out. Looking else through here, there's a few other ones that I think might have been him. It looks like Major Altitude might have been his stuff, and we're in the Recruits era. And this is, I'm sorry, I say 93. This is 1990, 91. I apologize for saying that. So yeah, there's some more here that seem like they're Mark Bright work, but I can't be sure. I think he did Dusty. I think he did Red Star. I think he did Big Ben. I'm not sure if he did Cobra Commander, though, to be fair. Oh, yeah, well, definitely did Dusty, again, because you go on the back and you look at his face. And he gave, like, that flat jaw mount, that flat jaw. I'll bet you he did Tunnel Rat. Yeah, there's so many in here that he did. To be honest, there probably is a website that literally names all of these. I couldn't find one. Although dummy, didn't check the main 3D Joe's one. I just used Google, but they probably have this on 3D Joe's or yojo.com. So, but again, hey, I've been sick. My head's not straight. So he just defined the look of so many Joes of that era, that late 90s or late 80s, early 90s era. He just absolutely nailed it. And that was for me. That was also when I was getting subscriptions too. So that was coming in my house. I didn't even go to the store for those. That was me saying, I want to get this. I don't want to miss an issue. So that really, it just meant so much. I'm pretty sure I first saw him on Green Lantern. And it was in a DC sampler. I think it was from 1988. So I would have been 13. And it was like a free DC sampler. And it had a sample pages from Emerald Dawn. And it was the first few pages. Written by Chris Priest, Jim Owsley. He only wrote the first issue, though. And I was actually had the opportunity to ask him that. And he said he wrote one issue and didn't feel it. So he gave it back to the editor and said, someone else take it over because I'm not going to do a good job with it. Which is really stand up, like to say that, no, this is a big project because they're redefining the origin of one of their major characters. And he just didn't have it in him. He just wasn't feeling it. That's what he told me. And the explosion of the airplane in the beginning, and the caption was the stentorian bark of an angry god. And pretty sure you can quote me on that. And just this explosion that Mark drew just popped off the page, man. Like it's like the Sunbow explosion. You guys know the Sunbow does great explosions. Mark Bright did great explosions. There was it's a kinetic energy. It's just like his figure acting, right? His characters had kinetic energies. His characters had things they were about to do. And you saw it on the page. They weren't standing around. They were getting crouched and getting ready to go into action. Even if it was just to like get a cup of coffee. They were like, I'm getting that coffee with gusto. That's what his explosions did, man. His explosions were like, yeah, we just blew something up, but boy, is there more energy in there to be expelled. That's what Sunbow did on the cartoon. If you think about the Joe cartoon, Sunbow, those explosions were dynamite, both the color of them, but just the roiling expansiveness of them. And there's a containment to it, but then points where it just becomes an outlet for this energy that's how I always think of the Sunbow explosions. Same thing with Mark Bright. There's a few other creators that achieve that. Someone like, for example, one my favorite artist of all time, Walter Simonson, he doesn't do his explosions like that. He does different explosions. He does explosions where it is everything. Like his explosions are, that's it. That's all you're gonna get. It's the biggest thing. God came down and blew something up. That's what Simonson's explosions are. Mark Bright's explosions are like, it still wants to give you more. After he snapped that photo of that explosion, he wants you to think that there's still more to be drained. That's I think that's the best way I could describe it. Just absolutely fabulous. So we're gonna checking out his DC stuff. He did a very fun miniseries called A Bizarro. That's for some reason Steve Gerber jumps into my head as the writer on that. If I'm wrong, I'm not even gonna look it up. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But it was very fun, very underrated, and it literally is about A Bizarro. It's kind of like iRobot. That's the play on. It was about someone who got turned into it wasn't traditional Bizarro. It was someone who got turned into a Bizarro. So it was A Bizarro. Really great. Of course, he did all the Icon stuff, which was a part of the Milestone verse, which was over at DC. But he worked on Icon 1, 2, 3, 1 through. Jesus, he did 42 issues of Icon. That might be the whole run. I don't recall when that book ended. Really, really great. He had a small run on Batman too. And it's funny, we talk about Snake Eyes' trench knife. There's a great Batman cover with a close-up of Batman's face, and there's a giant trench knife right in front of Batman. And I've always been like, that's very reminiscent of Snake Eyes' chest trench knives. He did a little bit in the Nightfall, Night End, I guess it looks like. I must have done one issue. A little bit. He did a little bit on Batman. He did a little bit of Dead Man. We talked about his great run on Green Lantern, and that was some solid Green Lantern stuff. Of course, it led to Hal getting going crazy and then getting killed. So, as a character success, that run doesn't really hold up because it just led to Green Lantern not really hitting with people and having to be replaced. I always have a soft spot for it because that was a run I was reading when I was in high school. It was my first run with Green Lantern. I really loved it. I loved Guy Gardner. It featured Guy a lot in it during that time. I used to bring it to school and read it with my buddy Derek Honacki. Derek, if you're out there, shout out. We used to read Green Lantern together. I'm outing you. But he did Emerald Dawn 1, of course. He did Emerald Dawn 2. 2 was great. It wasn't, it just did, telling a character's origin always has more pop than telling the next day. And Emerald Dawn 2 was simply the next day. It was more the origin of Sinestro than it was the origin of Hal. And that's good, but not as interesting to me. But it was really great. So I love the Emerald Dawn stuff. I urge you guys pick up a copy of it. It's really, really solid. He also did 4 issues on a great series, Valor, which was the spinoff of, technically, I guess, a Legion of Superheroes spinoff, where it featured Mon-El before he went into the future, post-invasion, where the Daxamites came to Earth. And it was Mon-El's adventure in our current time as he eventually leads up to him seeding the planets that would eventually become the home planets for the Legionnaires. As a series, it suffered a lot from editorial caveats. Like, it came at a time where there were a lot of crossovers. It spun out of the Eclipso crossover. It then ran into 0 Hour, and that's no one's fault. That's just that was the time, and they were doing it. The fact that they gave, I think it went 18 issues. The fact that they gave Valor / Mon-El his own series is amazing. But Mark started it, so he did the first 4 issues of it, and it was great. I loved his take on it. He did some work in Secret Origins. He did a couple things in the Titans. Yeah, and that's it. So I mean, his big stamp at DC was really, it was Green Lantern and Icon. Those are the real big things. And I've read most all of these. Absolutely, most all these books. It's really awesome. So G.I. Joe. So over at Marvel, Power Man, we talked about that. He did an issue of Avengers. He did some Thor. He did, it's funny. He did Thor right before Simonson took over. That's great. There's his Falcon work. He did a little bit of Rom. Armor Wars, I'm telling you, it's the stuff. after that, oh, you know what he did? He did the backup series in Captain America when Scourge was running around shooting people. During the Bloodstone Hunt, which is a very excellent Captain America story. If you've never read the Bloodstone Hunt, seek it out. It's awesome. I think Kieran Gillen did the art. And it's literally hunting for the pieces of the Bloodstone to grant someone immortality. Baron Zemo, it's the first appearance of Crossbones. You got like Machete and all these like B-list dudes straight out of Master of Kung Fu have to fight Cap and Diamondback as they run across the world trying to put these pieces together. Really great series. But there was like a short 3-4 page backup that was about Scourge of the Underworld, who was going around killing bad guys. And Mark drew that Scourge backup story during those. So then we get him on G.I. Joe. And from here, from what I can see, is G.I. Joe 89 was the first one he did. 90, 92, 93, 94, 95, 6, 98, 100, of course, 101, 102, 103, 4, 5, 6, and 8. So left right before 9. And remember, 8 is that great cover with Snake Eyes holding Cobra Commander hostage, in front of all the Cobra troopers that are pointing their guns at him. Came back for 131. Did a little bit of Black Panther work. That's with Chris Priest. He did unfortunately, it's not his fault, but he did the Marville, Marville miniseries. If you guys know that story, that's a bad story for a bad story podcast. The editor-in-chief at the time, Bill Jemas from Marvel, they were launching the Ultimate Universe, and like it was a weird thing. Like he boasted that he could make any book sell. There was something, my memory's foggy on it. There was something, basically he said he could do any book and it would, they could do it. So he took over writing chores, and let's just say he's not a writer. It was terrible, an absolutely terrible book, but Mark Bright drew it. So it looks really good. Let's leave it at that. And of course, his work on Quantum and Woody can't be understated. Quantum and Woody's fabulous. If you've never read it, I don't know how to read it today. I know Valiant collected it in trade in the mid 2010s. I don't know if that's still available these days. I'm actually not sure the current status of that whole Valiant universe. But there's probably trades. I was going to say it's easy to get a collection together, but it's actually not super easy the last time I tried to put one together, because I think print runs weren't super huge on it and Quantum and Woody, and then the people who like it really like it. They want to hold on to it. So when I put my collection together in the early 2000s, it was hard for me to get one of everything. They weren't expensive by any stretch of the imagination, but I had to do a lot of hunting. And the hardest one of all was there was a singular one-shot called Goat, and it was about a super spy goat that hung out with him, and it's stupid and it's funny, but it was impossible to find, like really hard to find for years. So Goat might be the last book that you get, which is ironic because we are absolutely talking about a goat. So with that, I've rambled on enough. One of my, if it hasn't come through, an absolute artistic hero of mine. Was very sad to hear that he passed this week. I hope all of you enjoy his work. I hope you enjoyed going down this little memory lane with me, talking about how great Mark Bright was. If you're not familiar with his work, seek it out, man. Really, any of this stuff. Go to those .fandom pages, or fandom. What is it? Like fandom.dc, marvel.fandom.com, or dc.fandom.com. Those two websites do a really wonderful job with giving you like biographies of books that different artists worked on, whether it was, they just penciled it or inked it or just did the covers and all that stuff. It's not 100% perfect. There's you always find a little bit of tweaking, but it's a communal wiki thing, and it's really, really great. So if you're looking for just general comic stuff, you want to find all the books someone worked on, those are really great resources for it. And that's where like I pulled all this stuff. I love seeing that. I really read almost all his, like, I probably read 80% of his major comics output, which is awesome. Like, that makes me so happy. And it's great. I love hearing that he went on to work in, like advertising and storyboards, because I hadn't seen a lot of his work and I wasn't sure what happened to him. Whether it was his choice. I mean, I hope it was his choice, but I know those fields pay better. And I hope he had a really great life. And I hope, I hope he was surrounded by family who will miss him. I know his fans are going to miss him. I never had a chance to meet him, but if you ever did, count yourself lucky, because he is an absolute talent. I think he's one of the, I put him in that category of Gil Kane, where Gil Kane was, I think, underappreciated, a real workhorse, someone who really could deliver the goods and really distinctive stuff. And I don't think was appreciated in his time. And I think Mark Bright's kind of like that too. I think his stuff is just solid and fun. He really drew like an action figure come to life. We talk about that a lot on the show. Sometimes your G.I. Joe art will look like army, like actual real human soldiers. And sometimes they look like action figures. And I love the action figure look because they are action figures. And really, Mark did a great job with that. He did a great job balancing the action figure with the real. So rest in peace, Mark Bright. We will miss you. And everyone, appreciate who you appreciate and celebrate them while they're here, because you never know. So we lost a star for G.I. Joe, and I hope everyone takes this for the celebratory half hour that it's been, because I really enjoyed doing this. Thank you for coming along on this journey with me. And now you know a lot more about Mark Bright than you probably did a half hour ago. And knowing more about Mark Bright is half the battle.